Chapter 19. The Last Chapter. Poison Ivy sat in a barred square of moonlight in her cell at Arkham Asylum, considering the tiny flower she held in her hand. She could hear the shrieking and cursing that came from the cells of her fellow inmates farther down the corridor. The Riddler, the Mad Hatter, Maxie Zeus, all of them thoroughly mad, all of them hollowed out by this place until they were devoid of hope. Only the Scarecrow refrained from shrieking and cursing with the rest of them, but he was the maddest of all. In the whole cell block, perhaps in the whole asylum, only Ivy was able to cling to her sanity. And what made her different, she asked herself. What made her unique here? The promise that still lay like a seedling in her breast, the anticipation of spring, lush and green and sweet-smelling, rolling over humankind like a mighty flower-covered steamroller. That, and a more personal hope. She turned to the window, wondering how long it would be until winter arrived. Then she began pulling the petals out of the flower, one by one. "He loves me," she said, her words little more than a sigh. "He loves me not. He loves me. He loves me." "Not," a voice interrupted, followed by a click as of a lock opening. Ivy turned and saw a figure cloaked in shadows. It stepped forward, revealing itself as Mr. Freeze. "It's amazing what you can buy around here for a few dozen diamonds." He approached her, coldly, she thought, but that was hardly a surprise. His aloofness, his hard-to-get quality was one of the things she found attractive about him. "Freeze," she said. "I knew you'd come to get me, the same way I came to get you." Caught up in the nearness of him, she reached up as if to stroke his cheek right through his helmet. Before she could touch him, however, he grabbed her wrist, his mouth twisted with rage. "I didn't have enough to buy my way out of here," he grated, his eyes narrowed savagely. "Just in." "In?" she echoed. "But why?" And suddenly she knew. Somehow, Freeze had found out about his wife, the way she'd really died. At Ivy's hands. She became afraid, very afraid. "Prepare for a bitter harvest," Freeze told her, his eyes glinting like daggers. "Winter has come at last." Ivy swallowed. This wasn't the kind of cold embrace she'd had in mind. Bruce watched morning break in the hills to the east, a glow of ruddy gold sandwiched between the horizon and an unbroken blanket of clouds. Then he turned away from the window to look back over his shoulder. The living room of stately Wayne Manor was filled with pizza boxes, Chinese food containers, and articles of clothing strewn over the furniture. Barbara, who had been up half the night watching over her uncle, was dozing off on the couch. Dick was pacing, red-eyed with lack of sleep himself. They were afraid, all of them, afraid that Alfred would be lost to them forever. But Bruce was afraid the most. After all, Alfred had been his world for a very long and a very vulnerable time. In a way, losing the old man would be like losing his parents all over again, and he didn't know how he would be able to endure that. Bruce squinted as the sun blazed forth, revealed in all its glory. Then that glory faded as it rose out of view behind the clouds. In the distance, he saw a V-shaped flock of geese. They were headed for warmer climate, unlike the bats in the caverns below the house, who remained all year long in their chittering darkness. As he followed the geese's flight, Bruce was reminded of a day long ago. He saw himself as a boy again, standing outside on the estate's snow-dusted fields, trying to imagine what Alfred could be saying to the stout man in the living room. It wasn't until the following week that he realized the man was a psychiatrist, in fact, who meant to relieve him of the pain he was feeling as a result of his parents' deaths. There had been just one problem. Bruce hadn't wanted to be relieved of the pain. It was all he still had of Martha and Thomas Wayne, and he wasn't about to give it up. Even at his tender age, young Bruce knew that with grim certainty. There was only one way the stout man would leave him alone. So Bruce opened up to him, or pretended to. He poured out his feelings of loneliness, of rage, of fear and resentment. Or rather, not his real feelings, but what he thought the stout man wanted to hear. It pleased the stout man to no end that he had cured the boy. He had gone into the arrangement believing Bruce was a hopeless case, but somehow he had drawn him out. In fact, he'd told Alfred that it was one of the highlights of his career as a therapist. Of course, Alfred had known what was going on, but he hadn't intervened to protest the boy's behavior. It was as if he'd sensed that Bruce would need a clean bill of health one day, as if he'd known the boy would need to fade into the background, bland and uninteresting, so someone else could emerge and never be linked to him. Before the eyes of the adult Bruce, the flock of geese vanished past the treetops. He sighed. Alfred. Suddenly he heard a harumph. It had come from the vicinity of the stairs. By the look on his face, Dick had heard it too. Rousing Barbara, practically lifting her off the couch, Bruce and Dick made for the hallway. But before they could get there, they saw someone walking toward them from the other direction. Two someones, actually. As Bruce watched, a lump taking hold in his throat, he saw that one of them was Alfred. The other was Doc Simpson, holding Alfred's arm for support. But mostly it was the old butler, scowling as he went, who was doing the work of transporting himself. Simpson let go of the man, and Alfred took the last few steps into the room by himself. And there was some color in his face, by God. He looked as if he'd gotten some of his old strength back. Barbara blinked at the sight of her uncle. She peered at him with disbelieving eyes. Dick was staring too, not daring to ask the question to which they all wanted to know the answer. In the end, it was Bruce who asked it. Sort of. Alfred, he said, despite the tightness in his throat. Are you... The butler's scowl deepened.
Rather disappointed at how poorly I seem to have taught you proper housekeeping?
He glanced disapprovingly around the room.
Why, yes, I am.
Alfred allowed himself a bit of a smile.
And quite well, it seems. Thanks to you, Master Bruce. Thanks to you all.
Bruce went over to him. So did Dick and Barbara. One by one, they hugged the man who was at the center of their family, the man who held it all together for them.
Well, said Simpson, I ought to be going now, but I'll stop by later to check in.
He paused for a moment to shake his head.
I don't know where Wayne Enterprises had to go to get that antigen, Bruce, or who you got it from, but it's going to save a lot of people a lot of misery.
The billionaire smiled.
When administered by dedicated and caring physicians. Thanks for all your help, Doctor.
Nodding, Simpson left. Alfred moved a pizza carton with thinly veiled repugnance and sat on the couch where Barbara had been sleeping. He eyed his niece with curiosity.
You know, I had the most remarkable dream while I was convalescing. I dreamed that while I was asleep, you had hacked your way into the disk I specifically forbade you to look at.
Barbara flushed. Right. Well, you see,
And that's not all, Alfred said. I dreamed that you took that proprietary knowledge and used it to create a suit, a bat suit of all things. And then you used your new autumn apparel to go after Poison Ivy.
He chuckled.
It's amazing how foolish you can be when you're dreaming.
Barbara swallowed. You overheard us talking, didn't you, when we thought you were still asleep? Dick grunted.
Nothing gets past good old Al.
Nothing. Bruce moved the pizza box a little further along the length of the couch and sat beside Alfred. Welcome back, he told his friend. It's good to be back, said Alfred. Dick pointed at Bruce. I've been meaning to ask you something. When Barbara, Batgirl and I rolled off the telescope, you didn't try to save us. He tilted his head. How come? It was the first time I ever fell and you weren't there to catch me. Bruce shrugged. I knew you could handle it, he said easily. You did? Barbara asked. Dick shot her a look. She noticed it. I mean, she added quickly, of course you did. Sometimes, said Bruce. Counting on someone else is the only way to win. He winked at Dick. At least that's what I've heard. Barbara appeared indignant suddenly. Hey, I'm the one who kicked Ivy's botanical butt. Personally. Me. I did. Bruce looked at her askance.
Yes, you did. And you'll have plenty of time to savor the experience back at school.
She stared at him. School? After all we've been through together, you'd send me back to that place? Dick rolled his eyes. Give up, Bruce. This is one argument you're never gonna win. He glanced at Alfred. You either, Al. Barbara clapped Dick on the shoulder. I knew there was a reason I saved you from certain death. Dick turned to her. You saved me? She nodded. As I recall, yes. He thought about it for a moment. Maybe you did at that. Barbara extended her hand. Partners? Robin clasped her offering. Partners. Then the two of them turned to Bruce. He stood, sighed, and enveloped both their hands in his own. Why fight the inevitable, he thought. Partners. Alfred smiled from his place on the couch.
I do believe we're going to need a bigger cave.
You can worry about that later, said Bruce.
Right now, you need to get some rest.
Alfred held up his hand.
If it's all right with you, sir, I'd like to stay right here. I've had enough bed rest to last me a lifetime.
Hey, look, said Barbara, facing the windows that looked toward Gotham. She pointed to the sky. The bat signal! Bruce turned and saw it emblazoned on the blanket of clouds. They appeared to have thickened and darkened over the last few minutes, as if gathering for some mighty outburst. A storm coming, he thought. In Gotham, it seemed, there was always a storm coming. But this time, he wouldn't have to weather it alone. He took some comfort in that as he headed for the grandfather clock that led down to the Batcave, with Dick and Barbara close on his heels. This concludes the reading of Batman and Robin by Michael Jan Friedman. This book was read by Drew Griffin.